that set up. All right. So back to recording. All that we've done is we've run create React app with our example app name here. We have cd'd into the directory. Inside that directory, we deleted the source folder and we created an index.js with the bare basic code here. And from this point, we will continue on and create our app. So let's get going. The first thing we need to do is we notice we're importing app, but we don't actually have our app component because we deleted everything. So let's do that. Let's create a new folder called components. Let's create, I always nest all my folders, all my components in folders as well. So I'm going to create an app folder, and then I'm going to create an app.js folder file. Yes. Sure. I'm going to post the index.js in Slack for us. Right. I know it. Let's see here. Is it this one? So there's our snippet. And we are back into our app.js. We created a whole new file, so there's no old app.js.
Everything in your source folder except for app.js.
Yep. No, you're good. Go for it. So oftentimes when you're working with React Router or let's say the Context API, you'll have these different things called providers, and they provide global state for your application. For React Router, that global state is what the URL currently is. For your providers, it might be what your list of blog posts is or what your user is. And so what you'll do is you'll end up wrapping all of those around your app component, and it looks a lot better and it's a lot more visible to see what you're doing if you set it to a variable. That is a good question, and I'll be sure to demonstrate that here in a moment. All right, so back to our app folder. Yes? Go for it. So any component that I create, any React component, so for instance app.js or blogpost.js, right? Each one of those components, the class generally starts with an uppercase. When you code the component in JSX, it's an uppercase, and we are going to keep the uppercase convention in our component files and folders as well. Index.js is not a component. It is the script file that mounts React to the HTML page. And so for that reason, I just keep it lowercase. All right, now we will be using functional components. Can anyone tell me the code to create a very basic functional component here? If I can spell it. Yeah.
You could do parentheses or
So there's two different ways we can do it. One way is the arrow function. Thank you. Yeah. And then the other way is if you use the function declaration. So these are your two basic ways to create a React functional component. They both work. They're both great. Use whichever one you want, but for this lecture, we will be sticking with the const format. We do. Interestingly enough, if it's not returning any JSX, and what I mean by JSX is like a div here, right? If we're just returning a string, we don't need it, but we will be returning more than that very shortly, so let's import React from React. Now, there's one other thing missing from this. Does anyone know what it is? There we go. Awesome. And we will export default app. All right, this looks great. And we will go into, I'm going to keep this over here. I'm going to load a new window over here. We will have our local host. Just kidding. We are going to, this is a demo from yesterday, so we will change it to 3001. And all we're going to do right now is do npm run start. And this will start our development server for React. Yes, please. All right. Now, we have an error here saying we're not importing it properly. And so there's different ways you can import files, different ways to link to the paths of files, right? So if we were to do an absolute path, right? It would start with something like a slash, right? This is the very root of your folder, of your computer, /users, your name, desktop, right? As you go down the chain in the absolute path. Now, generally in React, you will mainly use relative paths, right? And so this is, instead of starting with a slash, you do a /. And then you go into your folder, into where you find the app. And then last but not least, there is one other type of path. And this is more like a project path. And this is where you can just do components /app. And in order to set up the project path, if we look at our React documentation, I will paste this link in Slack for us. This is just something that allows us to use our project absolute imports. So in order to use this, it says this is an example of a jsconfig.json. So we will just copy that and go outside of our source where we have all these different configuration files. And we will create a new file called jsconfig.json, just like the example, and paste it in. And that's it. One thing we will need to do is we will need to restart our development server. Sure, yes. So I would go to this link in Slack, and if you open up that link, you will find a link to absolute imports, and this just makes our imports cleaner. If you want to keep using relative imports, you're welcome to do that. And the documentation says to create a JSConfig file and just copy and paste their example config into it. It goes outside of source and right next to your package.json or README. That's exactly right. Oh, one moment. No, if you want to keep using relative paths, you're welcome to do that. I find this one is easier to use, especially when you have a lot of nested folders. And there's a question back here. You'll create it next to your package.json file, outside next to source and public.
Just a side question, if I had to manually restart my React
Yes, you will need to manually restart the development server once you do that.
Yes, and when you do that, I'm getting this error, there's already a service running.
So that means you probably have a project open from yesterday that's already running on localhost.
How do you kill that? You have to find the PID and kill it?
No, there's a somewhere in your terminal there's a tab open or a window open that has that running. And if you want to, for now, you can just say, I would like to open it on another port. And it'll start going from 3000 to 3001, etc. As
Say, it's opening up Chrome and
yes, yes.
how did you reload it?
So in order to reload it, you will either click, I think it's Control C on both Mac and Windows in the terminal, and then you'll want to npm1 start again.
So regarding this config, JS config JSON file,
Yes.
so we have two different sections here, compiler options, we give a basic URL and include source. What is the difference? Can you describe exactly what these are?
So one of them says, what are the files you should include in the absolute configuring? And the base URL is where should you start? And so we're saying we want to include everything in source, and we're saying we want to start our paths from source.
What is the include indicated? Is that
So it won't necessarily include anything unless you tell it to, in terms of the imports like this. So really what we're saying is we're starting from source and we're going into that. And there'll be more information in that in the React docs as well. Yeah. All right. Is everyone ready to move forward with the app component? So it will be right outside next to your public and source folder. Oh, that was just an example of absolute and relative and project paths. And we won't be using those, but yes. All right. Yes?
just a tangential question here? So we're not doing source control on this particular project. But I noticed that when I create the project using Create React App, I call that project an absolute job.
Yes.
And then I have to navigate into that and I'm running the project.
Yes.
So how are we doing get it init? Do you recommend
So believe it or not, it's already done a get init for you. It already has a get ignore for you. And in fact, the only thing I'm pretty sure you have to do is get add your files and get commit your files. So when you bootstrap Create React App, it should have most of that already configured. Yes. Exactly. Yes, yes. All right, well, let's move on to the app.js here. And we are returning hello world. But what we will actually want to do is we'll want to have a div to fill our other components. So what are our other components here? What did you say? You'll want to have your app.js be the container for your other components that you'll render. And so if we're going to display the picture of the day, what are some components you think we might need for that? Yes, so something like the NASA a picture of the day. I'm going to abbreviate it to APOD. And you know what? That's good for now. Let's start making an APOD component. So in our components folder, we'll create another folder, and we'll create another file with APOD and APOD.js. And for this, There we go, that should help. And inside our apod.js folder, why don't we just create one more functional component? Can I have someone else volunteer to give me another functional component? Hmm? Yes, we do. And let's just return hello world from that. Now, there's two other things missing from this file. Does anyone know what they are? Yeah. Thank you. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is, so we've created our function in apod, and now we just want to link it to app.js. So, yes. Sure. Actually, I think that should be all good. Yeah. Did I updates or reject it? Okay, sure. All right. If we're looking here, save all and commit message, merge. All right, get audit, get status. Oh, that just means how big React is. I have a plugin that tells me the cost or the size of everything I import. All right, all our commits should be in master now, and we will keep on rolling. So let's go over here and let's say we need to import apod from its directory. So we'll just go into components. Well, is that working? Yeah. /apod, oh, /apod/apod for apod from. All right. Now let's see here, compiled with warnings, why don't we refresh? And we have our hello world from our apod component, which is great. Now, there is one more place that I think I want to start with as well. In order to having a component that displays the picture of the day, why don't we have a component that picks the picture of the day? Yes.
I'm getting an error on this import in my terminal.
Mm-hmm.
Module not found, you're attempting to import components 8.8, which falls outside the project source directory. All the imports outside the source are not supported.
Did you copy? Hey, Beck, could you? Awesome. All right. Let's see. So we will also create an date picker component as well. And so that way we have a component to pick the date as well as the picture of the day component to render the picture for that day. So let's create a date picker folder and a date picker JS file. And we've already done this twice, so I'm just going to say here is our file here with a functional component, and we're just going to say hello from date picker. And of course, we know that we need to import React from React. And we also need to export this component. Yes? All right. Let's see here. 1 second. Go back where? Sure, sure. I'll leave that up for just a moment. Make sure that your keywords like export and default are all lowercase. And if this type of import isn't working for you, just feel free to stick with the relative imports as well. So now let's also add our date picker component into our app. And one last thing we will do is we will add it to our app component as well, so it renders to the screen. And I'm just going to change the hello world in APOD to hello from APOD, just so we can see a distinction there. So all we have right now is our app component, and we have created a date picker component and a picture of the day component. And both of those components just return text, like hello from date picker and hello from APOD. Do we have any questions so far? All right, we'll keep on rolling then. I think let's start out with one of the first things we'll do is we will have our date picker select our date, which will make it easier for us to develop the picture of the day component. All right, so first thing we'll do is we'll also look up the date picker from HTML. They have an input form that works like that, so we will do MDN. Mozilla Developer Network. It's generally the most up-to-date reference for JavaScript, HTML, CSS, etc. And it looks like, from our example here, we have a few things. We have an input, we have a label, and we also have min and max values, and those will come in handy here in a moment. So I'm just going to say we want a div, and in here we want our date picker component. I would use a React fragment normally, but I think divs for now are fine. Yes. Yes, I will. And I might just call the label date, label for date, Now, this for attribute, you'll see actually, it should error out on us, but because for is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, we actually use HTML for. And by a reserved word, I mean something like const or import or class, etc. And this HTML4 has to link up with the ID. We don't need the name for this particular project. And it's putting in a date in here. But what if I want it to automatically get today's date instead of just a day from 2018? So one thing we'll do is in one of our previous lectures, we used the moment module, moment.js, and I will paste this link in Slack as well. Hold on just a second. And what we will want to do is we will want to install this as well. Yes? Mm-hmm. So there's two types of closing tags. One you'll see is this paragraph tag right here. But one other type of tag, for example, the image tag, is self-closing, which means you still need this closing slash here, but you don't need to do image and then close image, right? You just need to do, oh, interesting. You just need to do that. Yeah, good question. All right, so we will npm install moment, and we will make sure to do --save, and that will save it to our package JSON. So if we ever decide to pull it down from GitHub again and install our dependencies, it has everything we need. Moment is a library to help with dates and times in JavaScript. If you ever work with date and time, I would strongly recommend using a library like Moment. Similar to Python's datetime library. You want to npm install moment, and then with the save flag here. Yes. I posted one in Slack for it's just npm install moment. Oh, so the different ones, right, so there's different locales, right? Different countries around the world start on different days of the week. They might have different, here's a great example, different languages to say the day of the week, right? And so for all these different variations, you can also install these things called locales, and they will install the type of variation that you need. So if you were developing for Americans, it would be different than developing for Europeans, different than developing elsewhere around the world as well. All right, so it looks like it finally installed Moment.js. And we will now do npm one start again. Bless you. And yes, anytime you install anything to your React project, actually, one more thing I'm going to have you install while I have it on my mind is npm install, and we're going to be using React Router. So I'm going to bring up those docs real quick. And I will post the npm install link here for you in a moment. But we're going to use React Router DOM. Oh, that didn't work. No, so you will have to do it for every app, unfortunately. Yes, thank you. Yes. So the dash save, if we look over here, we will see in our package JSON, it lists everything we have installed. And save installs it and then saves it into your package JSON. So when you specify your packages and your dependencies, you'll notice this caret here and then the string of numbers. This is called semantic versioning. And what the caret means is we want 16 points anything, right? If you're using semantic versioning properly, then your code should be fine for all versions of 16. Now, the package lock says this particular project used 16.8.6, right? And so the package lock is specifying a more specific version, and that is good for security concerns as well.
So if I were pulling this down and write add full JSON, package.json file, I just want to install.
Yeah, it all works.
Which one would it pull from, the lock file or the?
If you have a lock file, it'll pull from the lock file. If you don't have a lock file, it will just take from your package JSON. Yeah. All right, so now what we have installed is we have installed React Router DOM, and we have also installed Moment. Oh. All right. And so does everyone have those packages installed? Yep. Yep, all right, looking good. So let's, every time you install a package, you will want to restart your server. So let's npm start again. And our app should be working because we haven't changed too much here. All right, that looks great. We have our date with our date picker, and we also have our hello from Apod. Awesome. So let's go back to our date then, right? We want to say our default date is today's date. So let's import moment from moment.js, or just from moment. And what we will do is, let's go up here and let's say const today equals moment, and we'll just call it. And we'll also console log this so you can see what it is as well. And when we console log, we'll notice moment is actually an object, right? And this is nice and all, but it doesn't match our format that we're using for our date picker. Yes? I made a variable called today, and I created an instance of moment by calling it like a function, and then I console logged it. Sure. Is there a way to do that with OBS? All right. Tangential questions? Anyone? Yes? Sure. Let's see. Oh. All right. Here we go. The index.js is also available in Slack as well.
What would you say is the best way to use
It depends what you're using it for. So if you wanted to use it across your app, I would recommend using React Context API so that you can pull it from anywhere. And then I would also recommend using useReducer. But we haven't learned that, so I would stick with useState for now. Sure thing. Exactly. We haven't done it yet, but we will here in a moment. Oh, right. So right now, we have a moment object. And we have to, exactly. That's exactly right. And we had another over here. Sure. Yeah. Awesome. Which one? I believe just recording with OBS, but it will be uploaded after the lecture's done. You need to restart your server. Also make sure you have it in your root here as well.
So we have a second. Can you talk about a best practice for environment variables, things like your API key or any secret keys, and how you would manage those in a React project?
So there are frameworks that manage authentication for you if you're using Google's Firebase or you're using Amazon's Cognito or some other third-party solution. They generally take care of auth for you. But if you're dealing with secret keys, anytime you're using that in your browser environment, there is no way to really keep that secret. In terms of someone who knows enough can go and look at your requests and find it. Someone, right?
Oh, right. I'm sorry, I misstated my question. Yeah, I understand that much, but you need to have them somewhere.
Right, and if you need to have them somewhere, there's something called an env file. This is an environment file. And over here, React actually has something a little bit different where you have to prefix it with React app. So I will pull up Create React App and show you those docs. Create React App. Getting started. env. And your env, you do not want to commit to version control if it has your different keys inside. Let's see. Yeah. Right, so really don't store any secrets in it. And it has the same warning about how anyone can inspect and view it. But if you want to use anything, you have to prefix it with React app. And so, for example, we could do React app NASA, right? And we can set that equal to, I don't know if it needs quotes or not, actually, but we can set it equal to our string.
Well, like to the API key.
Yeah.
Right. So if I create a .env file
Mm-hmm.
and I put such a variable as you've shown here.
And so we can just go over here and we can do a console.log. And there's a variable called process.env. Now, I can't remember if it prefixes it or not, but we will look over here at our env, and we just do NASA. So we will just say .nasa. Nessa. Now it might be React App Nessa. I'm not sure which one it is. Let's try React App Nessa. That's still undefined. Why don't we try it from, let's look at our env here. Okay, so it doesn't have the quotes around it. Let's look at that. Yes, we had a question over here, and we won't use it in this particular project, but it's a good question. So we will go back over here, and I'm also going to, just for the sake of debugging. Oh, you know what you need to do? You'll need to restart your server. Forgot about that. That's a really, yeah. Yeah. So one of these will say my key, which is the first one, so this doesn't work. And so if you do want to start. Yes. No, it's at the very beginning when your server npm1 start, it will pull it from that file and set that to it.
Okay, so the bottom line, this is just a good practice for setting up the scanning file, putting all of your stuff that you don't want to do.
Yes, exactly.
Then when you're deploying, you're going to need to set those private variables on the server.
Actually, I think it'll. So there's multiple types of env. You have .env.local, .env.production. And so if you did specify those individual types of env, it will pull it from the particular one. If you do just a plain env file, right, it will pull it for all of them. Yes. Again, if we go over here, they are exposed to the user, right? So do not use it for private API keys, right? It is still accessible.
Yeah. I mean, that is what I've done with setting up server where you have that. I'm sure there's a way to do it. And probably
the best way to do it is if you have an API key that you need to keep secret, keep it in your own server. That would be, yeah, because the client doesn't have access to your server code. You good? We're good to go? All right, everyone. We will start getting back to it. Let's see. We can keep that for now, but we can delete this. And where we left off, time is 10 o'clock. Where we left off here is we just console.logged moment, and we saw it's an object. It's not actually the type of string that we need for our date picker. Now, if you go to the docs for moment.js, you'll see a format command. And this allows you to format in any way you want. So in our case, we want the year, followed by the month, followed by the day. Now, I'm going to save that. We're going to log it. And we will see we have the exact string we're looking for. While you all are writing that, I will open our moment.js docs and show you where that is. And let's see, we are going to look for a format here. And you will see it takes a lot of different formats. Do we have... What I'm actually looking for is a list of the key and the shorthand here for the format. But anyway, all the moment.js docs are there. They're a great help. And we will keep on moving along. So we have our today variable. Can anyone tell me how we would set the value of the input to today? Yeah? Yeah? Awesome. Thank you very much. And so we have today, and it is set to today's date, 2019, which is great. Now here's something interesting. We have a max here. We have no idea what NASA's picture of the day is tomorrow. So let's go ahead and set our max to today as well, right? Because we don't want them to go and throw us an error there. And there is one last one, and that is the min here. And the minimum, if we go to our NASA API, and we go to our API listing, and we go into APOD, it says the earliest date we can possibly get is where is it? Huh? That's APOD earliest date. I think it's from, yeah, here we are. The first image appeared on June 16th, 1995. So let's create another like const min date. And we need it to be a new moment. But what we'll do is we'll say it is 1995 and the 16th. And June, I believe, is the 6th month. But I will double check that for us. June is the 6th month. Yes, okay. So in order to parse the date, what we do instead is we give it the date to parse, and then we also have to format it. And we will be formatting it to the same format that we did for our today date. We could do that as well, yeah. That's true, yes, yeah. The reason why was to show how to parse dates, because we'll be needing to do that for our URLs here in a little bit. But excellent question. And because we've already done it, we'll just do it in a date. And let's look, make sure nothing crashed. And it looks good. We have our max date of today. Notice how I can't pick anything afterwards. And we also, if we go back into our years here, have a minimum date of 1995, which is sweet. So let's keep on moving from here. What we actually want to do is, why don't we set our URL to the date? That way we can have each date on its own URL. So to do that, let's bring in our browser router from React Router. So we'll do our import. Yes, this is an index. So the browser router is a provider, so we will wrap it around our app component. And this will be from React Router DOM. React Router DOM. So what we will do once I fix the import error is we're going to wrap it. Oh, I know why this is. Oop. As router, and we're going to put it around our app. That's why we created the root variable. Yes. So it means the provider data or the provider state will be available to everything, every component inside it. So we want our router to be available to everything inside of app. And what we actually need to do is move that inside. There we go. And the reason I'm naming it as something is depending on your environment, you might not need browser router, you might need a hash router, you might need a memory router. And naming it just as router will help us later if you ever decide to switch environments.
Sorry, the browser router, as router in the brackets, what's the deal with that?
So I'll show you an example here. So let's say we had a user, and
Well, I mean syntax.
yes, I'll show you this from this as well. And his name was Bob. And we wanted to get name from user. We would do normally set it equal like this. Now, what if I don't want the variable to be called name then, right? What if I have a name somewhere else in my code? We could just rename it like this as my name. Now, the as syntax is exactly the same as this. The only difference is as is used in imports. You can also, I think you can export. We'll just say import as.
So is router the word arbitrary?
Yes, router is completely arbitrary. All right, so as everyone has their browser router around, let's go into our app.js. And let's say, you know what, for our date picker here, and our picture of the day, we want to render them based on a certain route. So we need to import router from React Router DOM. And we want to create a route component in order to render our other date picker components. So we'll set 2 here in a moment, and we want our component to equal, this one can be date picker. Router. All right. And we're going to do the same thing for apod here. And right now, we're just going to render them to slash, and our page should not break. Just kidding. Because it's not a 2, it should be a path, perhaps. Nope. We're going to look at the docs and make sure we get it right. It is a 2. No, that's a link. Path equals. And then our component. Because it's not a router, it is a route. Sorry. There we go. And that should not error out on us. So we wanted to import route instead of router, and everything else with the path as well. Yes. So the route component is a component taken from React Router DOM, which connects itself to our browser router. And by doing so, it's able to read what URL we're on. And we're saying if the path of our URL contains slash, then we want to render that component. And that component is what we specified here as component. Notice that this component is a variable, not an actual JSX format, because the route will actually take care of all the rendering for us. Yes. Index.js? Sure. You're welcome. All right. And so now that we have our app here, you know what I want? I might want a separate home page for later. So I'm going to say instead, we want this to be under apods. But we also want a custom variable for our date. So in React Router, you can use this syntax with the colon for a variable, and I will pull that up in the docs for you. I will also shrink this down so you can see it. And let's see here. URL parameters, perhaps. I don't want an example. I want the actual. If we go into route. Does it? Yes, so this is an example of a variable inside the route is using the colon here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into our date picker component. Important to note, both of them have date in it. Yes.
Yeah, when I did the last one,
Should not. Oh, so in your index.js, you will need to make sure you have your browser router. That's what that error is coming from. Yes. Did you do? You will need to make sure you npm install it and save it. Any other questions? All right. So in our date picker, what we want to do is yes. You're welcome. All right, so back in our date picker here, whenever you render something with a route, it will automatically pass props to your component. So we're going to say props here, and all we're going to do is we're going to console log and see what we get. So if we go back over here, yes. Yeah. So this is a variable, and we want to access that variable in both our date picker and our picture of the day. That way our URL matches what picture we're displaying.
So you have the same 2 lines in date picker?
Yes. No, it has to be a singular component. Yes, it's exactly like Django's int PK. Exactly. Well, you're saying what it's going to be called right here. And then all we're doing now is, let's see, first we need to go to /apods now, because that's where we're rendering our different components. And let's do, notice this URL here. We're doing apods and then /anything. And if we look, we'll notice the props that we printed out. We have 3 important items. We have history, location, and match. These are all default props generated from our route here. Anytime you wrap a component in route, it will give us those 3 props. Yes. Oh, yes, in the Chrome one? Very good idea. Here we are. Thank you.
Did you import APOD into date picker?
No, I did not. Both of those are being rendered from our app by our 2 route components.
So you imported app to date picker?
No, date picker is just a component on its own, and the only place where, the only thing we're using with date picker, this is our date picker component. It's not importing any other components, and yeah.
So we did, I think I misunderstood you when I said that route. Those 2 route statements are in those 2 lines. You did not put copy and paste over the date picker.js?
I did not, no.
Okay, that's what I was saying. Why is your box outside?
So I can add parentheses back. Well, my formatter doesn't let me, but when it's only one prop that you're passing down, parentheses are optional. Sure. So this is a console log of props, and we have 3 props from our router that it gave us, or route. And this is our match, our location, and our history. I'm going to hide history for now. And if we want to learn more about those different props, which we will here in a moment, if we go to our React Router documentation, I'll post this link in Slack. This has our different objects that were passed down and what's inside. So we have history, location, match. Now, what it looks like we want here is we want our params, and if we look at the definition here, this is the, it's a little complicated, but all this is saying is we want this variable date. That's all that this describes, is we want, they're giving us an object with a key of date, and in our case, the date is dynamic, and that is the ASDF here. So if we go into our match prop here, and we go down to params, we see we have a date param equal to ASDF. Yes. Now I'm going to show you one other thing. So props, right? We showed up here. Props is equal to match, M-A-T-C-H. It has a location, right? And it also has a history. Now, when we're pulling, this is the type of object that's getting sent down to props. But we know what we want. We know we want match, right? And so what we can actually do is we can, using this syntax, take match right off of the props object. This here is saying we know props is an object. Give us match. Yeah. And if we were doing it with variables, it would be the same as doing const match equals props, like that, right? So because it's named match, we can pull it off. Yes?
So when you limit match inside your date picker as an argument on line 11?
On line 11, we know that the...
Limiting that to match.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what if you want to use another props argument later on? Can you just say props dot match further down?
So you would have to also add it in here as well.
Props.
Not necessarily. So I'm pulling, in addition to match, now I'm pulling location.
Right, that's all you have access to.
Correct.
inside of your date picker.
So in fact, I don't want my date picker to have access to anything else.
Okay.
I want it to keep my code and my props limited rather than...
Structuring it here is keeping you from potentially accessing something else.
Yeah, so if they're... Yes, and to keep the code cleaner.
Did you just do props and props on that?
Yes, that's exactly the same thing. So we could also, instead of doing that, we could just pass in props and do props.match. And down here we could just do props.match if we had kept the props component. And what this is called is, in JavaScript, it's called destructuring. And I will, I'm just going to paste this term in here. There's a good article for it. I don't have it on the top of my head, but I will get it to you after the lecture. All right. So I'm going to delete this example here. And what I'm going to do is I only want match. And if we look here, inside match, we want to go to match, params, and date. So can anyone tell me how I would get that if I were to try and console log it?
How's match working if you use the object?
So the object isn't actually deleted. All we're doing is we're saying this object, we know it has match, location, and history on it. This is very similar to the props that we're getting here, right? And all we're saying is we want only match. That's part of this object. So we're taking it with this syntax, we're destructuring match off of the object.
Because you see the props, right?
So this is saying we know props is an object. We know that we're going to be passed props. And we know that we just want match from this object that's being passed to us. We know props contains all this other stuff. We know we just want match from it.
I realize that, but you just deleted that, correct? So it says props is not defined.
So if I ran this, right, it would be props is not defined. That's exactly right, because we said we only want match from props. So what we can do is we can say console.log match, and it gets us only match.
So like where is this code?
Mm-hmm.
Like where is it called? Some
So the function date picker is a component inside our components datepicker.js. And in order to render it, we're importing it into our app component, and we're giving it to route, which says whenever we hit this path, right, a path that has a pods and a variable after it, whenever we hit that, render date picker for us.
But then like you're not sending any code.
So you're wondering, so normally, right? Normally when you pass prompts, it would be like date picker and then like match equals some object, right? The thing with route is a component that's going to render it for us. And because it's rendering it for us, it will give us those 3 default props, match, location, and history.
So that's default.
Yes, and I posted a link in Slack which has history, location, and match documentation for it. So those are all things coming from React Router automatically for our convenience.
I see.
Hmm?
So,
So all of this is client side. So these are when you render React, as long as you have. Here's the interesting thing. Whenever you host it on a server, right, the server will say whatever path you asked me for, I'm just going to forward it to React. And React Router will say, oh, I know what this path is. Oh, I have a route for this path. I'm going to display it.
like, what are match locations to
So match contains what the current URL includes. History is a way to say I want to go to a new page, and location has more information about where you currently are as well.
So basically, we're just going to be worrying about matches because that's going to happen.
Yeah, we'll worry about the other ones when we get to it. Yeah. That's a great question. So why don't we go over to our date picker? We're console.logging match, right? And what we want is we look at this and we see, oh, this is our match object. And we see, oh, it has params and it has date inside. So this state is coming from this value right here, which we see after apods. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
In this file, I noticed, both of these routes are identical.
Yes.
Right now, I'm running them and I'm not getting an error. I'm getting actually I'm getting what is on both pages.
Yes.
Is that by design? or is
Yes.
that- Okay, so this is actually a technique to get multiple, to follow this page.
Yes. So you can compose. Let's say I'm just going to give you an example here. Path equals /apods, right? And this will be on any path that starts with /apods. Now, let's say you don't want it to be on any path that includes apods. Let's say you only want it on the home apod path, right? Then in order to do that, you actually have another prompt called exact in order to say, I want APODs to render, I want this component to render on APODs, but only APODs. I don't want it to render on any of the child pages. That is by design of React Router 4.
And this is the way that you propose it.
Yes. Yep.
I'm trying my, I'm not getting any output.
Hmm.
I'm not getting any output. I'm not getting anything on the screen.
Let's see here. Hey Dee, could you come and help with that one as well?
How are you getting that, those parameters in the console when you're just printing match now?
So what I'm printing is the match object, and the match object has all of these inside.
Doesn't Clement show that?
Make sure you're destructuring it, right? So these curly braces are very important to have around. Exactly. That's exactly right. So let's do that. We have our ASDF, which is exactly what we want. Yeah, awesome. Now, here's the thing though, right? We don't want to actually have ASDF as our date. We want to have something else for that. So let's go back into our app here and let's say, you know what? Our app, let's see what props our app has. And if we console.log the props of apps, we see it has no props. Oh boy. So there's two different ways we can solve this. It should have props, shouldn't it? And the thing is, actually, you know what we'll do? We're going to create a new APODs component just for us to say whenever we go to just /APODs, it will automatically bring us to the most current date. So we're going to create a APODs component that is a plural for multiple pictures of the day. So we'll go here, we'll say APODs, we will create a new file called apods.js. Yes. Yes.
Did you get more of this locals blah 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 slash APODs?
Yes. And in APODs here, we're going to create another functional component. And all we're going to do is make sure we can render it to the screen.
I made another APODs.
Yes, this is a plural APODs. Sure. So one thing we notice about our URL here is we don't want users to have to go and type in today's date, right? We don't want them to go 2019, 08, 07. We don't want them to do that. So we're going to do that automatically for them. And in order to do so, we need to catch whenever they land on APODs. So we're going to create a component called APODs to catch whenever that happens.
So whenever this is something,
So whenever we land on the APODs, it will automatically push us to today's date. Yes.
well, the thing is, I'm not gonna just like I'm not going to do
You get a blank page, right. And so our goal is instead of having a blank page, we're going to redirect them to a current date.
why would we not just, instead of making APODs, go to date picker and say the default date is today's date? Are we ultimately going to ask them to enter date?
So in our singular APOD, we will have our date picker there. And that will serve as a little bit of navigation for them to jump to any date they want. We could also have them start out at just a date picker if we wanted, but it may look a little better with a picture of the day next to it. And especially if we're automatically selecting a date in the date picker, it should show whatever date we selected. Sure. And while we're in the app.js, why don't we go ahead and import apods, from components /apods/apods. And what we're going to do is we want to set it at this page called apods, right? Yes.
I didn't see the apods.
All we did is a functional component saying hello from apods, just so we know we can get something from the screen.
You imported apods to app or to apod?
To app. Yes.
What's going to mean? Is that going to handle all of our?
So what it at the beginning, all we're going to use it to do is to redirect. So we will use it to redirect to today's date in apods. Later, if we have time, we will say we want it to display multiple days, but we'll see how much time we have for that. All right, so we have our apods component. This is just something for us to see, oh, we've linked the components together properly. And if we go into our app.js, we want it to render on this page. So can anyone tell me how I would do that?
Route at equals slide icon.
Yeah. Yeah. Now there is one thing here. That's exactly right for this. But do we want this? So this is a redirect, right? What we're going to do. We don't necessarily want to redirect on any of our child pages. We only want to redirect on apods, not any of these child pages down here. So it's very important that we add exact so that it only renders on apods.
What's that React?
And the path is the current URL. Yes. Oh, it's route. Yep. Yep. And so now we see if we go to this path, we have hello from apods. But we want to redirect to today's date. To where? Yep. So we're just saying exact any on our component to equal apods. Exact means if we didn't have this, I'll take it out and show you. It means if we went to any child page, like there, it'll still say hello from apod, which we don't want. We want it to be only on that one page. So now that we have our exact popped on there, it will only appear here. All right, let's make our apod redirect here. So all I'm going to return is, well, actually, hold on. First here, can anyone tell me the names of the 3 props we get from the route component? Yes, exactly. And now we're going to learn about the history prop. So we want to destructure it. We get props, but it has a key of history, and so we're pulling that off.
Are the props naturally values
So history, location, and match are default from React Router, and they will include. Those are 3 different ways, 3 different objects relating to the URL that you will see up here. So our URL is localhost/apods. Those 3 different prompts help you manipulate, change, read, etc. The URL. Hmm? So we can just console.log props from here. And all you're getting is you're getting an object with the history, location, and match on it. And what we actually want to do is we want to say we want only one of those. We only want history. So we're just going to say we want history. And then in here we will say we're going to console.log history. And when we do this, that's the same as saying props.history. And that will give us this object here that we've console.logged.
And if your date picker and are showing up in your A pods, what possibly cause that?
If your date picker is showing up in APODs, you want to make sure it will depend on whether you have something at the end here or not. And if you look back at your route component, you'll want to have that variable of date. And I saw another question. Yes?
Why would you use
Hmm?
Why would you use history?
Could you?
Why would you need history in this context?
So the reason we need history is you can think of it as a history of all the pages you've been to or are going to go to. And so in this case, what we want is anyone who lands here, we want to say, oh, don't stay here. Go to the current date of APODs. And so we're able to go back a page, forward a page, or to any page we want. And we will use history to do that. So let's give an example of that. I'm going to do an if statement here. This is just, you don't have to do this, but let's see. We will also pull in, if you look at date picker, we have match. We will pull in match as well. Let's see, do we have... Oh, it actually has a location for us here. That's pretty nice. And just, oh, morning failed prop validation. Alright, let's go back one here. And we're going to do, if location.pathname. So we're also going to bring in location, actually. And all we're saying is if our location.pathname equals APODs, we probably don't need to do this, but when we move this around later, we'll be glad we have it. Location.pathname is equal to APODs. Then you know what? We want to say history. There's a few different types of history. There's push, and there's replace. And if we go to our history object here, there's the difference between .push and .replace is .push means you're navigating to a new page. .replace means whatever page you are on gets replaced and it's not in your history. That is a triple equals. Good questions. So we're going to say .replace, and we want to go to /APODs. We do want to go to today's date, so let's do the same thing. Let's import moment again and get today. And I'll slow down and explain it once I have it typed. But so we have our constant of today, goes moment, and then we need to format moment as well with year, month, and day. And I will leave this up for you for a minute so you can follow along. So here's one thing, right? We want to replace it with today's date. We need a string there where we have our variables placed where we want them. So the best way to do that is with a template string. So I'm going to replace just /apods with the template string here. So we will take this and we will say we want to go to template string apods / and then we want to do today. And this code here, this today, the moment.format, is the same code we used in the date picker.
So you're using backticks because you string.
Yes, so this is for string interpolation. This is saying put today right here in this string, put our variable today. And let me try one other here. And it turns out our location.path name may not be that. So let's console.log that. Yeah, I thought, okay. So it's only if it equals that. So let's try replace again. I was debugging to see why that wasn't working. And yes, we are replacing, which means we can't go back to that page because our history doesn't know it was there. We replaced it instead of added onto it. Yes. And we don't even need to return anything from here. So I was going to say, yeah, just going to say things. But there we are.
What could possibly cause apods that component to render date and date or other
Me doing something wrong.
than
Or, yeah, like if I did something wrong, it might render. But in our case, we will not have this render at all. That should never render.
No, I'm saying like I did it on my app. I had the route to apods.
Oh, you mean this? Ah, that's a good one. If it equals that, that's a great question. So we have a slash here. Notice that that's slightly different, right? So we could say if it equals apods, or this is an or statement. So if one of them is true, it will run. We can say if location.pathname equals /apods like that. So now both of them will automatically redirect. Both apod with the slash and without the slash. Great question.
Disregard the if statements that you decided.
Yes.
Before we did any of that,
Yes.
you asked about JS.
Yes.
What would cause the my apod exact component?
Uh-huh.
When I try to go to that, it renders the date picker stuff. So it would
Yes. So what we did is we said apods, this component, it will actually start rendering apods. But apods will say, hey, if you're on apods and you don't have a date with you, right? Then we want to actually send you to the date and date picker component. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So all we're doing now is now whenever we visit apods, we automatically visit our date. Does anyone? Dot match works better. We are not introducing regex back. Hey, Beck. When we move it to our different page, we will simplify it as well.
What were you doing? Regex stars and
So it just so
If they haven't picked a date, we're going to default them to today's date.
okay,
Yeah? That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah? And that's great, but we only have hello from apod, right? We want to actually show something about today's date. So let's do that. I'm going to just say convert this to an arrow function. You don't have to do it, but it's just force a habit. That's sure. Hold on, 3 seconds. A pods. Is this it? Yeah. And all this is saying if location.pathname is the same as apods or apods with a slash at the end, then I want you to go and default to today's date. Do what? So anytime you have your route, you will find it gives you location, match, and history, and you can pull that into any component that is rendered by a route. Uh-huh. Sure. Yeah. All right. And yes.
So the default objects on the box are able to pull even though they're not. So I guess props get passed out to every single. We're doing like.
Yes, props is the default of what's getting passed to every single component. Now, the reason why we have things like match, location, and history are those are automatically given when you render it with a route. Yes. So match.params.date, that is the same as if we look in here, we're logging today's date. That is this variable, and we defined it in our app.js by saying in our match.params, we're saying we want a variable of date. And this variable of date is what we will use in our date picker here. Oh, sorry. Here. Any other questions? All right. Now here is one. I said we were going to display the picture, and we'll do that soon. But here's one thing, right? Let's say if we change our date picker to the 29th, it doesn't actually change at all, right? We can't use our date picker to switch between pages. So why don't we do that? Right? How many of you know how to, or what is the syntax for for adding a handler onto an input? There we go, English. Yes, that's exactly right. Just like how your text components have on change, so does our date component as well. And so we're just going to do const date handler. And I'm going to set it empty for now, but on our change, we're going to be calling a function for that. Now, if we look back at our apods, right, we want to redirect whenever our date picker chooses a new date, right? So which of the 3 React Router parameters, or React Router match location or history allows us to change pages? Not quite. Yes. So we need to take in history here as well. History. There we go. And so every time the input changes, right, it sends off an event. And our new date is equal to the event.target.value. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to console log that, just to make sure we're actually getting what we think we're getting. So I'm going to go here, refresh, and it looks like we have an error, because I'm not running it. Yes?
What are the curly braces between, like where you're passing the arguments for date picker?
So this is called destructuring, and this is also earlier in the lecture, but what you're doing is you're saying, we know we have props here, and we know props is always an object. But when we render it with a route, we know that it's always giving us location, match, and history. And we're just saying, out of those, I want match and history. Right? So the way to do this when you're passing in the parameter of props is this destructuring syntax here.
And you knew the props had those fields because you printed props originally?
Yes.
In the console?
Yes. And if you look at the route documentation, it has all 3 props in there.
Change the date, I'm using structure.
Hmm?
Are we using the full-on fonts and then date, set date, or this?
So the reason we're not doing that is we don't actually want to stay on the same page. We want to redirect to another page. Yes. Yes.
So, you're passing in, it also do process.
Yes. That's exactly right. Yes. So we just logged that here. And if we look, let's change our date one more time. Right? Notice how it logged the, instead of today's date, it logged the 5th. Or let's go back a month, and it logged this, right? But we're not reloading the page or redirecting to a new page. So similar to APODs, could someone tell me how we would redirect to a new page?
Is it similar to something APODs?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes, history.push. And so our URL, right, we need to insert our variable. And so what we'll do is we'll say, we still want to go to /apods, apods, all right, and but we want it to be the new date. And that's great. Let's do it.
So assigning dates with event.target.value.
Yes.
What is value?
So I'll explain this. This is React is a mix of JavaScript as well as the own things that come from the React framework. And event is a JavaScript object that is, you can think of these different things listen for events. So this onChange here means we're listening for an onChange event. And onChange, right, so it's giving us an event. Its target, right, our target is where it came from, so the target is input. And then our value is, okay, what's the value of input? So we have our input and then our value, so we're grabbing that. Great question.
Do we need to import something to have access to history?
It's a prop that'll come down, so make sure you are destructuring history from your props.
So why URLs changing when I change the date? Remember what the actual date picker.
Let's see here. Let me save this and see if this works, because I hadn't saved it yet. Let me go to the 29th. Oh, that is interesting, right? So it turns out, and that's a really good note, is that our value isn't always today, right? Instead of today, it turns out what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const date equals our match.params.date, right? And our value should not always be today. It should be whatever the date is. So once we do that, I'll get to you in just a second. If we change it now, it'll switch this, the date, and everything as well. I had a question over here. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Are we supposed to have a date clicker on our page?
A what?
A date clicker on our page?
No. So if we land on our default page of APODs, right now, and this will change if we have time, it'll just redirect to today's date.
Same as computers. Can you go back to the oh, so they use the word within date picker?
Yes.
Is today not unused now?
Huh?
Is today not unused variable now? Or are we using today?
So date will be used as the actual value for the input.
I mean today.
Oh, today. Today is still used as the max,
Okay.
right? Because we don't know what tomorrow's picture of the day will be. So, yeah. Good questions.
Maybe learn more about value. Using it because we've done a lot.
Sure, sure. So you have many different kinds of inputs, right? We have a type of text, time, etc. And all of your inputs have different events. There's an on-change event, which means every time it changes at all, we're going to listen for it. But you don't just have on-change, right? You could have, if you want to do something on, it might be on mouse over, actually. On mouse over, you can have something like on blur. There's all sorts of different events, and React has synthetic events, and what that means is it just keeps it all the same throughout all the different browsers. And you can see a list of events there. But so for each type of event, right, on change, on mouse over, on click, on whatever, on click is very good for buttons. But you will want a handler for it. So depending on what this is, let's say this is an email. So there's two ways I would recommend naming your handlers. Start with on and then name, or do the email and then handler. Those are two very common conventions to name the function that goes into the on change. So just to mix things up, we'll do on email, and then we'll do const on email, right? So we're setting a function to a variable, and this function is going to be called every time this input changes.
Use like on email, I can make that I can do the use say
Yes.
thing and on change.
Yes. So on every change, you would set the state to the event.target.value, and the event is what is passed to the function every time an event is sent. And then the target is, okay, what sent the event? The input sent the event, and then our value is, well, our value.
So value is going to be
So if they change over here, if we change our date, our value would be our new date. If we changed our on email and we changed our text input, it's whatever text is in our input. Yeah. And we had another question over here.
Yeah, you want APODs to automatically replace two APODs with today's date?
Yes, so if you ever make it to an APODs page, it means, hey, you haven't selected a date, right? And if they haven't selected a date, then we just want to say go to the current page, go to the current date, and if you want a different date, then just use the date picker from the current page. Now here's something, right? What if we do ASDF whatever, right? There's two ways we can handle it, but I'm just showing you that you can't always trust user input. Notice how the current value is that, right? Is ASL whatever. I'll show you by going to inspect, and if we look at our value, it's that. So you can do extra validation if you want to on that. Just don't always trust the user's input. In our case, we don't really care. They can just enter a different date. All right. So you know what? We got our date, guys. We got our URL. That's awesome. But we still aren't displaying any information for it. We want to actually say, we've got this wonderful date. Why don't we get the picture of the day and display it? Yeah? So we have pretty much finished with the date picker for now. We have made sure that if they land on this, they'll go to the current date. Now let's actually display our picture of the day. One thing we can do is if we go back though to our date picker, we can take that with us. And I will just put it there. So we need to know the date from our picture of the day, which means we need match, which we used in our previous component. So we're just going to take match with us. And you know what? Instead of we'll log that plus the date. So we know for a fact that we're getting the proper date here. And that's great. That's fantastic. But what we want to do is we want to render a little bit more than that. We want to say, you know, in here we want to actually render out, let's see, so we'll just do date for now. But we want to render out the picture of the day, maybe the title, maybe the paragraph that goes with it. So can anyone tell me where we'll be getting all those different things? Yeah, and so in order to get that, we'll be making a fetch request to the NASA API. So let's, I'm going to do two things. First is I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to get my API key. Everyone else, please get your API key as well. And we're going to name it to a constant up here of very creative API key. All right. Cool. But we actually need to have our data there, right? So what are two things we need in order to have our data in our component? Okay, we do need the URL. We need to fetch the URL. How do you fetch URLs in React? Yeah? Yes, I can. Hold on a moment. And so in order to save your data that you get from the API, you're going to need state. So you're going to want to say data and set data, right, for our use state. Use state. Now, I'm going to set this default to an object. We'll go back to that later. But we need to actually fetch the URL. So we do need Axios. So let's go ahead and do npm install Axios as well. Don't forget the save at the end. And that'll take a second, so we'll let that load. So when you add the save tab, what it'll do is it'll go into your package JSON and save it here. So that way when people, like you save it to GitHub and you install it on a new computer, or if you're doing this to put on your portfolio and you have someone looking over your code and they want to pull it down and install everything, it's on your list of dependencies for them. So it'll work across computers and installs. All right. So can anyone remember what hook we use for fetching data?
Wait,
Using access.
Not quite.
like fetching it, maybe I have to do it.
There's a special React hook for that. Not quite. Good guess.
Use context.
All right. It's the only other hook we covered. Yes, thank you. Awesome. So what we'll do is we'll say react.useEffect. And this is great here. Now react.useEffect. I'm going to show you one other thing, right? Remember how we were defining functions? So like we have a function that looks like, this is the simplest function you can get, is an arrow function that just returns hello. You can do an arrow function that you can pass like a URL to, right? And that could return something else. You also can do a function where you pass the URL and the API key, right? And that could do yet another thing. These are all different ways of writing functions, arrow functions. And you don't even need those parentheses there. Now here's one other way, right? We've all used the function getData, right? And we return a thing. Oh, we don't want a TS signature method. And then last but not least, we can also do, if we want, like this, right? So in JavaScript, there's lots of ways to define functions. I'm showing these to you here so that, we know a function will always have parameters and it will always return something, whether we say it explicitly with a return statement or if it's with an arrow function immediately after. Yes?
What is the
So the useEffect method takes an arrow function. That's why I showed you all those functions. Takes an arrow function as its argument. So that function is what we will use to go get the data. And what useEffect does is useEffect says, every time this component renders, we're going to call this function that you gave it. So we gave it this function here. And every time our React component re-renders or changes, it will say, OK, run this hook again. So we're not going to use Axios quite yet because I want to show you something that might happen, right? So let's say we already have our data. So we're just going to say set data. Or nope, not const, sorry. We're just going to set data to like data, right? Oh, this is set date. That's funny. All right, set data to data. And if we look here in our apod, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to console.log fetched, just so we can see it. And I'll go to our console. Yes.
Why are you passing through
Oh. This is just setting any data that's completely arbitrary. We could just say this. Now, it's funny because my code linter won't actually let me do this. When I save, right, it'll say, no, you need an array here. And that's kind of interesting, right? Because it turns out if we don't have this array, this is a second argument to useEffect, right? UseEffect takes a function and it takes an array. It will run every time the function re-renders. And what that means, if we just put setData in here, you'll have an infinite loop because React will render your component. And then it'll say, oh, you have a useEffect hook. Let me run that for you. And it'll run the useEffect, which is good. And then you'll set data to something new. And React will say, oh, data is something new again. I need to re-render the component. So it'll re-render your component. You'll set that. It'll see you have a hook. It'll call your hook again. Your hook will set new state. And React will say, oh, we set state again. Let me re-render, right? And so you'll get an infinite loop. What this second argument here, this array says, anything inside it, any variable, we're going to depend on that. Don't re-render, don't call this hook, leave me alone, unless a variable in this array changes. That way you can say, right, we can go in here and we can get our date. And we can say, don't re-render this unless our date changes. Right? So that way, only when date changes will we call useEffect again. And this is extremely important for everyone because if you don't do this, you will have an infinite loop and you will max out your NASA API key and you won't be able to try this for an hour. So don't forget that.
You said you're a linter with that point?
If you all want to install a linter in a code formatter, just go to your extensions. That's what this is here. Type in Prettier and install Prettier right here. You don't have to do it, but it may. Yeah, I find it useful. Good for consistent code syntax. Yes, exactly. And our useEffect here is saying don't set the data unless our date changes. So I'm actually going to set some data in here, right? And I'm going to set it to the date because why not, right? And so I am also going to put a console.log here. And this will run every time it re-renders so we can see the component as it goes and re-renders and updates. So I'm going to just log data here. And I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to realize that I didn't do npm1 start because I committed just a moment ago. So we're going to npm1 start again. And we're going to say yes. And then we are going to see our development server here. You'll notice, right, as we go through, we have the first time this console.log runs, we have an empty object. That empty object is this right here. This is the default value of data, right? So when we're console logging data the first time, it's the default value of an empty object. Now, React knows, oh, this useEffect needs to be called because it's on the first render. So React will say, okay, we're calling useEffect, and in there, we're setting data to the current date. And then it keeps going. It calls our console log, right? So that's why we see data here. And then it finishes its render. And it doesn't call itself again because date has not changed. Now let's change date, right? Let's change date to the 28th. You will notice it has re-rendered, it fetched the data, and yes. What kind of parsing error? So that means you might already have date in there. So if you have const date again, I would check and make sure you don't have that. All right. Do we have, so just one more time, just to make sure. We're setting our data equal to an empty object. This is our default value. React is saying we are rendering the first time, so it renders it all out. And then it says we will call useEffect. So we're going to set our data to a new date. Yes?
What was the reload command from
Command R.
No. This code?
Oh, if you do Command Shift P, and then you do like reload in there. Yes. So right now we're passing in one piece of data, and the reason I did that is because I don't want to pass in our Axios call and cause infinite loops. I'm doing this, that data will be replaced with our real data in just a moment. Can I do what? I could, but our variable, when we actually do this, is going to be an object. And so using an object will be similar to what we're about to do. But you could use a single variable, yes. Uh-huh.
So just to clarify,
Mm-hmm.
React.useEffect method,
Yes.
this is on the React object.
Yes.
It's going to fire every time any state change occurs on the page unless you have eliminated it in the array.
So actually, if you have an array, it means nothing changes except what you have inside.
Okay, so you're limiting the scope of that part.
Yes, I'm limiting the scope of useEffect to what's inside that array there.
And if you have an empty array, you would never have any updates.
It would render once, it would call it once, that's it.
And
So component did not.
but the useEffect is looking for anything.
UseEffect
Any
is,
state change in the shadow.
without an array, it will look for any change whatsoever.
Okay.
And so here's a good question for you all. What causes a React component to re-render?
State change.
Yes, very good. State change, there's one other thing.
Restart.
Not quite. The other thing is props. If the props change or the states change, we're not using context here, but if context changed, those things will cause, I'll get to you in just a moment, those things will cause a re-render. And here's something, if you never call a set state inside a useEffect, you will not have that infinite loop. Right? It's only because you're setting state again that you're causing the component to re-render that you would get that infinite loop without having that there. Yes?
Two questions. One, you don't have a web page set up on the web page for each date.
So this is, this APOD component here is what will display our date. We're just setting it up so that whenever we make a fetch request to the NASA API, we don't accidentally cause an infinite loop and all our API keys are busted. So we wanted to set this up first, and we're then going to fetch it.
And then, so the second question
Mhm.
what's the difference between a state and a prop?
So a state is something you have inside a component. It's internal to that one component. So data and set data is internal to APOD. Now, we're passing down through here APOD, and any functional component will receive the first parameter, right? The first parameter, if you think of a function, my function, anything inside those arrows, this is a parameter. And for React, the first parameter is always props. And so that is where props comes from. Now here's something interesting for you. Props, right? If we go over and we say, I'm just going to delete that and say a new component here, right? Don't type this. This is just an example. props, and then we will say, I'm going to say new parent component, and I'm going to say new child component. So our child component will actually be rendered here, right? And our props is going to be whatever we pass in through here. So we're passing in name. Props is always an empty object. Props will always be an empty object. But if you pass name, you can do props.name, right? This prop here, this parent, which is rendering new child, will pass its props. It will be added to the props object, and then you can access it inside. And we were using destructuring earlier, so instead of doing props.name, we can just do name, and we can say name. That's what props is doing. So whenever, yes? Sure. I'll yeah. What part? So if the date is not defined, you'll want to make sure your URL has something like this in it.
Oh, they're not doing the equals match, not for state, what's happening.
Oh, okay.
So that is, you line 2 and 5.
So those props, you can add on to any component when you render it, and they'll be passed in as that props object, and you can use destructuring to get the individual keys that you want. Now, and so it looks just like this. Now name here, right? Name can be state from new parent component, right? So you can be passing new parent component state down to child as props. React is very good at passing data around. Props is for passing data, or functions, or Right. So if you do that a lot, right, you should be using context instead of props. That's exactly right. Thank you. Yeah. Woo! All right. So that's great. But yes, question. So it depends on. So props in React are always this first argument here. Now, if you have like an HTML element, right? Let's say we have a class, and we have a class of like container, right? This is a value, and this is an attribute. It's also the same way you pass props. And each different kind of React element, a div versus an input versus a button versus whatever, right? Each of those have different values and attributes, or attributes and values, I should say, that is specific to that particular HTML element. And to find those out, I would recommend going to MDN and looking up that element. Yeah, so if we go down here, we see support common attributes, and then we have other attributes as well. So MDN will list all of this for you. And you'll notice that a lot of the HTML elements share similar attributes. And so the more you learn, the more you'll be able to reuse it in your code as well. Huh? We haven't fetched the data yet. We're not displaying it anyway. Yeah. Uh-huh. We're printing it right here. I just wanted to print something so we knew it was being rendered. All right. Any other questions? Does everyone feel like they understand useEffect and how it takes in a function and an array? Does that make a little bit more sense?
How important is the array, like, as a second parameter?
Very. You will have infinite loops if you do not have that.
So, like, we're gonna have to use that with data.
So the reason why we have date here is we're saying anytime the date changes, we want to fetch new data, right? We want to fetch a new picture of the day. So let's go ahead and fetch the picture of the day, everyone. What we're going to do, we're going to delete that, and let's import Axios, right? Import Axios from Axios. And I'm going to find the URL and paste it in Slack for the NASA API. So we are going to apod. You know we have this. I'm going to post this in Slack for everyone, so here we are. And then, so we want to fetch that URL there. Oh, my formatter thinks I'm not returning anything. But we will fix that. So we want to do axios.get. And we're going to use template strings because we want to be able to pass in variables into the URL we're fetching, like we want to get the date, and we want to pass in our API key. And so we're going to say question mark date equals our date, right? And we're also going to say that our, let's see, they have an API key, and it's all lowercase here. That our API key equals our API key, right? And so I'm going to also copy this one and paste it in Slack as well, because it's a little wide and hard to see. Yes?
Did we get rid of set data from the
Say that one more time.
Did we get rid of the set data?
I deleted it, but we're about to add it right back. So can anyone tell me what Axios returns? Yes? Awesome. What do we have to do to wait for a promise? Yes. What does .then take? What do you pass into .then? Yes, there we go. And that function has our response, right? And what do we want to do with our response? All right, by so we already have a function to handle it, set data. And so we'll just want to set data here. And we know, because of the way Axios works, the response has some information we don't need. We just want the data off it. And I'm going to log this to make sure I got it right. I pasted it in Slack. And so if we look, we have our data saved as what the picture of the day is. Thank you. All right. So again, we're just doing our fetch. We're getting our response, and we're setting data to response.data. Yes. Did you chain it onto axios.get? Could you console.log for me the URL as well, and make sure your actual fetch request is valid? Yes.
I didn't see the entirety of the syntax. There's a comma. What is a comma after the
My formatter thought there should be a comma. You don't need it.
Okay, so you get, and what's that dot then?
The get. So .get and .then are both chained onto Axios. You're doing Axios.get, and then you're doing Axios.get.then. It's the same as doing like Axios.get, and then you're doing .then, just like that. We're just passing a function into then to get our data, and we're passing the URL into get so that we get the proper URL. Questions? Hey, Beck. We're having a response there over there. Sure, yeah. Notice here we have the date that we have here in our console. This is the data we get back from the NASA API picture of the day. All right, are you all ready for the really cool thing? No? Oh man, here we go anyway.
Cool things coming.
We're gonna choose a different date. And look, we got different data. It automatically fetched the new data from the new date. I'm not sure. App.js? Okay. What I'm going to do right now, this is a good point for me to commit everything. And this will be, all the code up to now will be available in the live code of today. All right. Any other questions?
So this line.
Oh, the URL? It's posted in Slack. And it's also right here. Yes, your question?
So this line of code where we have React.useState, right? We've got data and we've got the set data. And then we're setting that originally to React.useState with an empty object. That state is representing everything, the current state of the DOM. Is that right?
So the use state, the DOM will display the current state, but use state does not necessarily go to the DOM.
So when I'm assuming that when we update something, we're going to use the set data. Okay, what object is that actually set?
So it's React use state allows you to have some type of variable and something to set the variable. And that variable can be anything. It can be an object, it can be an array, it can be whatever you want. And we're just saying this object that we got back from our response, we want it to be this right here. Now,
this is a global managed variable. This is a namespace.
Only in this component. Only in this component. Context is what you would use. And you know what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to set it to null for now. If everyone could set their default value of React useState to null, that will probably fix some problems in the future. All right, now this is really cool, right? We're getting our data and we're setting it. But here's the thing, right? We don't always have our data. And there will be a point where we're loading data. And there may be a point where we have an error getting our data, right? We need to handle all three of those use cases every time we make a request. So in addition to data here, right, we are going to want two other variables, right? We want a loading and a set loading. And we also want an error and a set error. So loading will always be true at first, so we can default it to true. An error, hopefully, should always be false at first because we haven't encountered any errors yet, right? And so we also need to use those so our component knows, hey, what should I be rendering right now, right? And I'll give you an example of this, right? So down here, if it's loading, right? If it's loading, we should return a div with loading, let's say, right? We want to be able to control what we're rendering based on whether it's loading or not. Can anyone tell me what we should do if there's an error? Huh? Yeah, we'll return an error message. So we'll just do error. And then, right, if we have data, then we will return, actually I don't usually do an if check for data, because if one of those things is wrong, then it'll just render it. So we can return here data.title, for instance. And I need to restart my server here. So it's loading, it's loading. I wonder why it's loading for so long. Oh, I know why. Hey, why is it still loading? Didn't we finish our request? Didn't we get our data? Wait, we created a variable called loading, but we're not changing it, right? So where should we put loading? Where should we change loading to false? Exactly, exactly. So where would that be? Yeah, so we've got our data. Let's do set loading and say false. Boom, look at that. We've got our title here. And we're setting loading to false. All right. That's pretty cool. One other thing we should do is if a promise fails, what do you do? How can you catch something if a promise fails? There we go. Thank you. So we're going to do a dot catch, and this takes in an error, right? And we're going to console.log the error, and we're going to say set error to true. Now hold on here. Can anyone see a problem with our code so far? Oh, that's exactly right. Thank you. That's funny. That's not the error I was looking for, but it's an error that will be unfortunate. Thank you so much. There's something else still wrong there with what we're doing. And I will demonstrate it to you real fast, right? What if I do this? Right? You get a 400 bad request. Oh, did it not set it? Interesting. It did, right? If we go over here and we console.log error, right? Error is true. But guess what? Why is loading still there? It does. That's exactly right. So what do we need to do to fix that? What we want to do as well, this is another bug we'll run into, is right. after a promise has finished, set loading will always be false, right? So set loading false here, set loading false here. Now here's one other thing. Whenever we start a request, right, up here, set error needs to be false. And set loading needs to be true, right? We need to be able to say exactly when it should be loading, exactly when it should have an error, and exactly when it should have the data. And this way, your React application can handle all these important states. Oh, there's a property of, hold on just a second. Cannot read title if null. Set loading is true. Oh, that's very interesting. What was your question? No, this is just using React useState again. I do. No, the interesting thing is I'm going to console.log. We're going to console.log data. We're going to console.log error. We're going to console.log loading. And we also, I want to do this twice. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that. This may be excessive, but console.log is my best friend. And here we are. So let's look through this. Let's debug what went wrong here. So error is null, false, true. All right, that looks fine. We have no data at first. You know what else I'm going to do is I'm going to do data here, loading here, and error here. I think actually all of this will be fixed if we just switch this back to an object. Yeah. Oh, I do? Oh, thank you. What I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to give it a default of an object. And that way, instead of throwing an error, it will just return undefined. One of those won't crash our application. So I apologize, but please set your default state for data back to an empty object. And I will scroll this down back into view. It was still getting down to data here. There's a point somewhere in here where it lets it render all the way down to data. And we don't have data defined as anything, so it tries to access title of undefined, and it throws an error. It's and the change that fixed it is having that there. Question? Huh? Yes, we will render in the image tags, etc. in just a moment. But does everyone understand the use of, yes? Did you do the set data response.data? And you said you're able to print it to the console? And just one more thing to show is, look, I can change the date, and it changes the title accordingly. But here's something for you all. We also want to display more than the title, right? This is a picture of the day at API. We're missing something very important here. We're missing the actual image, the picture of the day. So let's do that. I'm going to keep the div, and inside it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, oh, why did it do that? Come on now, there we go. I want the data.title. You know what I actually want to do? I want to console.log data so I know what I have access to. Because there's URL, there's title, I'm sure there's author, right? Copyright, okay. Data.title, data.copyright. We also want a data.explanation. And we also want a, oh, it has a media type. Ooh. All right. That would have simplified my life 3 days ago. And we also have our data.url for our image. And all of these things should be in different tags. So data.title, you might want an H2 tag for that. Data.author, you might want an M tag for that. For data.url, that's an image. Oh, come on. And that will have our data URL. Our alt, this is the image description. This can be data.title. And our explanation can go inside a paragraph tag. So let's see how that looks. Look at this. We have a picture of the day, a description, a title, and an author.
So,
No, I still want that to be I don't know that. I'll live with that. All right. One thing I am going to do, this is a little bit of CSS and JS. At the top, under the API key, I'm going to add a style. I'm going to add a max width of 500 pixels. That needs to be in a string. And I'm also going to give it a width of 100%. All right. And anytime you do, if you can, put CSS and JS outside your component, you should. If you can't do that, then of course have it inside your component. And we're going to give this style, right? We're going to take it and we're going to give it to the div. So style equals style. And what that should do is not work. We're going to give it to the image because that's what I really care about. Oh, hold on. Yeah, it's just a break line. Yeah, that looks better. I'm also going to try and give it to the div. Yeah, there we go. So I'm giving it to the div in the image.
100% string style.
Yes, all of the styles are strings. I will pull that back up there for you. Yep. Because CSS is wacky. Yes. So if is everyone good on the style object here? All right. Oh, 1 more second. All right. So we're giving it a div of a style of style and an image of a style of style. Sure, that can also be available on GitHub because we haven't touched this file in a long time. So the only time APODs would ever come into effect is if I didn't have a date. It would redirect me to APOD, and APOD would take it and window all this data. Sure. This is actually a great time. I'm going to commit this to GitHub. Git commit. So all the code is on GitHub as well. Does anyone have any questions about what we're doing or why we're doing it? Everyone good? Ready to move on?
It's not working.
At this point here, this is what I would say all that you need to have by the end of today. If you've been following along the whole time, you already have it. Everything we're doing after this is stuff that will help you, but is not required. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to show, we have this use effect here, right? And we have our loading and our error and our data. Now, how many of you want to write all of this out every time you make a fetch request? All right, so I personally don't want to do that. I want to have a custom hook where I can say, I'm going to give you the date of a date to fetch, and it's going to do everything for me, that custom hook that we're going to write. So we write it once, and then we can reuse it over and over and over again. Sound good? All right, let's get started. So if we go back over here and we shrink these down, we need to make a new folder. Instead of components, we're going to call it hooks. And then in here, we're going to call it use NASA. There should be a folder called use NASA and then an item called usenasa.js. Oh, come on now. And so this is a custom hook. A custom hook means you have all this different logic that you know you're going to need to use again in your application, and you're just defining it once so you can reuse it in other components. And the reason we're doing that for this is this is our detail page, right? Bless you, bless you. And we're going to want more than our detail page. We're going to want like a list of different pictures of the day, so we can click on any picture of the day in a list. So we want a way to say, fetch this URL in multiple components. That's why we're converting this into a use NASA hook. So how do we create a hook, a custom hook? Well, let's import React from React, just like every component. And here's the thing. Each custom hook is a function, and it always needs to start with use. All hooks start with use, therefore our custom use NASA hook also starts with use. So we'll do use NASA, and it's just a function for now, and we will export default use NASA. Just like we have functional components, our hook will also be a function. Now, can anyone tell me? Yes.
So starting with use is the convention.
Yes, it's not only a convention, but a lot of linters force you to use it, and React says I won't recognize it unless you follow the convention. Yeah, so somewhat arbitrary. Now, can anyone tell me what information I need to know in order to fetch from the NASA API? what information do I need to know in order to fetch from the NASA API? Awesome. Let's grab our API key, because we can just put that in here. And
If you wanted to share those constants between those two files, would you could.
so there you could use, remember the process.env from earlier today? We're actually going to take it out of the other file. And you can also export const API key as well. So lots of ways to shuffle. And you said we also needed the date, so let's pass the date in here. All right, so guess what? This is going to look exactly like what we did. We're going to take our code, for the exception of the date, and we're going to just take it and copy it. We're going to put it here. And yes?
What are we doing now?
We're making a custom hook. And so the reason we're doing this is our detail page, right? We're going to eventually say we want a page with pictures of the day by week, and we want to be able to paginate through so we can see, like say you have a list of blog posts, and you want to then go through the list of the thumbnails of the blog post. We're going to need a different component to render the thumbnail. And the thing is that all this logic here, we don't want to have to write it all again for our different component. Why don't we just encapsulate it in a hook and we use that logic through multiple components? And in order to do that, this looks good so far. We don't have Axios defined, so we need to import it at the top. All right, that looks peachy. Now, here's the very important thing. Our hook does not render any JSX, no HTML, no nothing. Our hook is just going to return, right? So let's say we have our other component here, so const thumbnail. And in here, we're saying, oh, we are going to return whatever, right? We're going to say const NASA, or whatever we want to say, equals use NASA, and we're going to pass in the date. That is how we're going to use our hook. But use NASA, whatever it returns, will be the value of this variable here. So we need to return the stuff that's important to us. That stuff, right, would be these variables right up here, data, loading, and error. So we're going to pass in data, loading, and error, right? And this is, these three variables in this object will be equal to this variable here. Yes. So return is just returning an object. This object has no name.
You didn't use the return state from APOD.
This is in a whole new file in use NASA.
Yeah, but if you went over to APOD and then copy all of this.
I copied all of this up to here. Yes. Now, here's the thing though. Remember how we were taking match location and history off of our router? In the same way, we can take data, loading, and error for when we want to use our hook, right? Because we're naming data, loading, and error right here, and we can pull them off in the same way right here. So our, say that one more time. Yeah. This is just an example of how we're going to use it in our thumbnail component. Yeah, this is, no, you don't need to write this part. Correct. This is just an example of once we have made our use NASA hook, this is how we're going to actually use it within our other components. Top? Use NASA as a function. We're taking in the date as the parameter to the function. And then after we do all of our stuff, use all of our hooks, we're going to return data loading and error. So all of this code here is abstracted away from us. And so what we're going to do, take a quick look at this before it goes. Ready? 3, 2, 1. It's gone. Now, I want someone to replace what we're doing here with the use NASA hook that we just made. All right. What's the first thing we might need to do? We're back in a pod, singular.
What did you do? Just the React effect?
Yeah, everything in the React use effect, as well as the state and set state.
As well as what?
The like data and set data, loading and set loading, etc.
What do you do with the return statement?
I don't think it had one. The return with the HTML is still down there. Can someone tell me the first thing we need to do in order to use our hook? Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. And it'll be from hooks this time instead of components. Use NASA, use NASA. That's exactly right. It even says you never use it, so let's delete it. Yeah. All right. Now what do we do? Yeah. All right. What does use NASA need? Yeah. All right, now we're calling it, but we want to save it somewhere, right? Or it's going to return us something. Can anyone remember what it's going to return for us? Yeah? And one thing I want to emphasize, this here is the same as doing like const NASA and doing NASA.data. This is exactly the same, this syntax versus this. Right? I am going to pull off the data loading and error because it looks better and it's I don't have to rename the constants. All right? Questions? Well, let's see if it works. How about we do that first? Let's just see if it works. If it works, nothing should change, right? npm1 start. And it looks like it works. Let's just change the date once. Boom. We have taken all of our logic, put it into our custom hook, and now we're just pulling off data loading and error, and we don't have to worry about any of the rest of it. Which is sweet. That's one of the reasons why hooks are so powerful, because components have no way to do that, except through higher order components and window props, but those get messy. Yes? Make sure in your, I'm going to push all this code to GitHub real fast. And while I do that, look at your return statement inside use NASA and make sure it has, you're returning an object with data loading and error. Yes, another question?
How does their return for control promise? Like, your promise is non-blocking, so how can you know that data will have
That's an excellent question. So what we're doing first is we're saying we have this variable called data that we're saving in our state. We're creating react.useState. We're creating data and set data. Now, at this point in time, we don't have a promise, we don't have our data, we don't have anything. We're setting it to our default value of an empty object. Now, in our React use effect, right, we're using Axios and we're using our promises. And once our promise resolves, then at that point, we're setting our data to what we got from our API. That's a very good question, and I'm about to show you how to write it differently here in a second.
So, when you return,
Yes.
when it return before it gets to a bin?
So right here, this is all data from your state. So it'll just return the default values. And anytime one of these use states changes, it will say, oh, we're going to return something different, and your component is going to re-render. Very, very good questions.
You can return more than once.
So you can return, anytime you change any of the state inside here, it will return again, and it will cause your component to re-render. Yeah? Very good questions. All right, and just so everyone knows, we have pushed up our current repo to GitHub, and that includes our custom hook right here. All right, good, good, great. Now, here's something interesting. Yes, question. Thank you, Beck. Any other questions?
Actually, did you do the constant data loading here on the custom code as well?
Say that one more time.
I was wondering if you returned that.
Yes, I'm returning data loading an array.
What's that?
So we're returning an object, and that object has these three key and value pairs. And when we go and use our hook up here, we're saying we have an object, and I'm taking off these key and value pairs.
You're taking them off.
Like I'm saying set, this is exactly the same as saying NASA equals use NASA. And only instead, I don't want to do NASA.data. This works. I just want to say, I know I have a data on the object it's returning. Just give me the data property here.
So you're getting that information back from the API, and you're saying that key data, and
I believe so. Yes. I couldn't hear the last part.
yeah, you're just defining the keys in there. You're getting values back.
Oh, this is I nearly forgot about this one. In the same way that you can pull off keys and values here, when you return it, right, from our use NASA, we can also, if our key matches our value, we can just delete it and use that, right? So instead of doing data is data and loading is loading, we can instead do return data, return loading, like that. Yes.
And you on API we're doing that's data.
All right. If we're all ready, I'm going to show you one little refactor here. Now, something very popular in JavaScript, now that it's supported, is async and await. What does that mean? Well, if we go, this is just an example, you don't have to follow along. Let's say we're having a function here. This is just going to start our code, right? And so we say, we're going to start it. And one interesting thing is, let's say we import Axios, right? Let's say I want to fetch 7 days, right? Or I want to fetch something, like I want to fetch a blog, and then I need to get and fetch the author of that blog, right? You have multiple fetch requests, right? So you might say dot then, and then you might have to get your response, right? And then do something with it. Now, dot thens, if you have a lot of dot thens, it starts to get messy very quickly if you have more than one. So what instead you can do is, instead of doing axios.getThen, you can put async before your function parentheses, right? To give you another example, it's async function start, like that. And if we use this keyword async here, we're allowed to use the await syntax. So we can say const apod equals axios.get, right, our NASA URL. And guess what? We don't have to use .then. We don't have to do any of that. If we console.log apod here, because this is the important thing, got to put await. Because we have this await keyword here, it will say, don't run any code after me until I've gotten this. All right. Yes?
So when you are running asynchronous code, all of those requests are kicked off and are returning on their own time frame. And the promise is waiting for each one of them to return.
Yes. So I'm going to show you, I think this might help answer your question, is let's say we had apod 2. All right? Now this is unfortunate. What we're saying is wait for apod 1, and then we're saying wait for apod 2. Well, that kind of sucks, right? Because why can't I just send them both off at the same time and get them both back at around the same time, right? In addition, you can do a promise.all, and what it does is it creates a promise with an array of promises, right? So I could say const promises equals promise.all, and I could put this one here, and I could put this one here. Now they'll both run at the same time, and the cool thing is, right, I can now say promise, index of 0, promise index of 1, or I could just say const promise 1 and promise 2, or NASA 1 and NASA 2 here, actually.
So you can't say, you're wrapping async in a promise. You can't.
Oh, you need to do await in front of that, by the way. Sorry, say that one more time.
You started off on line 7 with start equals async. So you're
Yes.
setting an async.
I'm telling, so functions will not be async unless you specifically tell them with the async keyword. And this is important because even if you don't have any promises in your async function, every async function will always return a promise. And did you have another question going off of that?
Well, then you're using promise inside rather than async again. So you can't say async at all.
No, it's, yeah, that's just a weird JavaScript thing. You do promise.all.
And you,
If you want to wait for a singular, you can do a wait, and then whatever returns a promise.
so where do you catch the individual issues?
There we go. Yeah, nice. I like this. All right. Instead of, how many of you, wait, try catch? Then catch. We have a try catch.
You go
Right.
to the whole try catch block.
Yeah.
And just catch once at the end.
This is catching once at the end, but you will need to use try-catch blocks. Yes. Question?
Could I put an hatch at the end of the start function?
Oh, you could, actually. That's a really good point. If you wanted to catch an individual error, you could do that.
And then at the very bottom, start function.
Then you would know which function.
Oh, yeah, you would, right? So, actually, here's the thing. If you're error handling in here, you can choose what you return, right? So in here, I can say I want to return value, or I want to return error. Now, it's true, right? If it throws an error, you can say, I want start to handle my error, right? So I can say, I don't want any of this here. I want to say, I'm going to say try catch, and I'm going to call await start. Now I can't do await start because I'm in the outside thing, right? But I can call start, and I can have my catch. So here's the thing, you can't use async and await. I can't do like await axios.get on the very outer level. It has to be within a function somewhere. It'll say you can't use it outside a function.
On line 19, why can't you lose your semicolon there and then put a catch?
Line 19? Yes, so what we could do instead is for start, we can just say dot then and dot catch. Yes,
Right.
yes.
So you don't need to call this.
Huh?
Oh, I see, because you want that to be on your execution, not on your definition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can put them in either place. It's your decision where you want them.
So you could just lose, on your last line there, you could lose the start clause right up to the, right up there.
Mm-mm.
And then back it up, lose the semicolon on line, what is it, 17 there?
So async needs to be with a function. You cannot use await outside of a function. That's why we're wrapping it in start. It's just, I wish it didn't work that way, but JavaScript said you cannot use async outside of a function. That is why we're saying start. That's why we're calling it, and then
But you previously said that you were on each one of those 8.1 and 8.2 returns,
yes,
the awaits, you could catch it on that one.
you could.
And that way you have granular control over what your
Right,
is. That seems a better way to do it.
right. But remember, every async function still returns a promise. So even if we did that, right, let's say we moved this up here, up here, up here, up here, and where you know we're returning value, you still need to do the dot then because async always, every async function returns a promise. Yes. Okay. All right.
I was going to ask, so for the constant and then this next one next to we got assigning axios next to so is that like you have multiple things?
So let's say you have lots of different requests that you want to run at the same time. If you're doing this way down here, it'll be request run runs, request run finishes, request 2 runs, request 2 finishes. The other one will be request 1 start, request 2 start, then request 1 end, request 2 end.
So there's the difference between await and that get.
So there's a difference between doing a wait and do a single promise versus doing a wait multiple promises.
You can only do this thing.
You can do thens and catches, but when you start writing async, your code becomes more readable than having thens and catches all over the place.
So further down, after you return stars at the very end there,
Uh-huh.
are you going to write your logic inside of it then?
Yeah, so I would say
Right, so you-
response, and we know for a fact that it will be
your
then.
response is going to be the array.
we could make it the array, but currently we're just returning value here. We could say we want it to be any of these variables up above.
Well, you defined it as returning NASA 1 and NASA 2.
Yeah, so if I wanted to return NASA 1 and NASA 2, I would do so like that.
Right, and then to get a handle on those, you have to say start zero, start sub 0, start sub 1, or do you have just the name itself, which you refer to?
So this here, whatever you decide to return from your async function is what response will equal.
So response is an array.
In this
Two
case,
values.
it's an array with 2 values.
So it's response sub 1, response sub 2 is the way to get to that value.
Or you could do like that. Yes, both of those work.
Okay.
Yeah. And the response sub 1 and 2 is also correct. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
If there's any catch, like what does it receive?
So there's 2 ways to handle catch. You could handle it at the end of each promise here and say we know we're always going to return what we want to, right? Another way to do it is you can say, you know what? I don't want to return anything unless everything is true. So you could do a try catch, put that there, and then console.log error, right?
So what would the error be?
It would be, so all of those are Axios requests, so it could be internal server error 500, for instance. And in this case, if any one of these requests fails, because they're all inside a try block, if any one of them fails, we will then go to the catch, we will log our error, and then we can change what we return based on whether the try succeeded or we had to go into the catch. And if you want to handle it all individually, right, say you don't care if one of them fails, right? You can add a .catch at the end here and handle it that way. Good questions. Any other questions? No? We are going to very quickly, because we are short on time. One important thing is this is our use NASA hook, right? We cannot put async in front of this, right? React says effect callbacks must be synchronous. But you're like, Jake, we just learned async and await. Why won't it let us use it? Right? What we want to do is we want to do a const get data. Set it equal to an async function. Right? Remember how we did our start? In the same way, we want to call get data with date, just like that, and then we can paste everything inside of it. And what we can do is we can say instead of can do const response. I'll fix my spelling here in a moment. Equals axios.get, right? And then what we can do is move that out, have that here, move these out, delete this, and then we can say we want to do a try here and a catch with error here. And this is what it will now look like when we use async and wait. Now you may be thinking, that looks about the same now. Right, so we have our try, we have our catch. Don't forget our await. That. And if we reload, if I start my server and reload, it still works. And so I'll give you an example if we had more time. We would want to set it up to where we can cache our API responses, to where we can say, oh, we've already requested this state before. We're going to pull it from the browser because we already saved it there. And that returns a promise, right? So you would await that promise, see if it has data or not, and then if it doesn't, fetch a new call to the picture of the day API. Unfortunately, we don't have time, and this is a pretty good stopping point for lunch. Do we have any questions so far? Yes. So we're not allowed to make this function async, but we still want to use async because it simplifies our code dramatically once we include other requests. So just like we did in the other one with the start function and then we called start, we're defining an async function with date, right? An async function that takes date, makes the request, does all the things, and then we're just calling it here. It's just React makes you do that for your use effect. Yes, exactly. So you can define a function inside useEffect that's async and call it, but you can't make the actual useEffect function async, correct? Huh?
So it's kind of just like moving down.
Kind of. So like you're defining everything it'll do and then you're just calling it. Yeah, exactly. You're just wrapping everything into a function. I will. Any other questions? I think we're almost done here.
Is there more like after lunch?
I mean, I can go further, but I don't think there is. I think what they want everyone to do is make sure everyone has as far as we got before the custom hook. And as long as everyone has that, then we can work on yesterday's project and just finish that.
I was gonna say, no list.
Yeah. This will be live code. There you go, push. Oh shoot, I didn't save that before. Dang it. Oh. Okay, never mind, we're fine. All of that code has now been pushed to GitHub. Yes. Any other questions? Is everyone ready for lunch? All right, Beck, is our lunch here? Oh, okay. Then do that. Thank you, everyone.